Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking Singapore's absolutely fascinating 2026 economic strategy review. And listen, this isn't just your standard run-of-the-mill policy update. We are literally watching a nation redesign its entire economic architecture from the ground up. If you've ever wondered how a highly developed but incredibly resource-constrained country plans to actually survive and thrive in the next decade, well, this is the blueprint.
Right off the bat, let's dive into this incredibly stark assessment from the strategy document itself. They use the phrase storm after storm. And honestly, it perfectly highlights why the old rules of globalization simply don't apply anymore. The Singapore Economic Resilience Task Force knows the world is fragmenting. Between shifting geopolitics, the massive sudden labor disruptions we're seeing from AI, and of course, ongoing climate shocks, relying on smooth, uninterrupted global trade, that's a bet no nation can afford to make right now. For decades, you know the drill. The global economic model was basically just growth at all costs, which relied heavily on hyperglobalization. But as we've all learned, pure efficiency creates really fragile dependencies. So Singapore is making a massive pivot to a new paradigm: intentional technology-augmented resilience. It's really about shifting from just being an efficient little cog in a massive supply chain to becoming an indispensable node. To pull this off and become the world's first truly AI-native nation, Singapore is relying on 5 core pillars: navigating the global storm, the AI-native blueprint, funding frontier technologies, evolving the workforce, and engineering sustainable resilience. Let's break these down. Okay, pillar number 1, navigating the global storm, focusing specifically on the macroeconomic crucible. So, the macroeconomic reality forcing this entire architectural shift really starts right here. The Ministry of Trade and Industry expects real GDP growth to normalize somewhere between just 1% and 3% in 2026. Now, sure, Singapore actually absorbed the shocks of recent U.S. tariff fluctuations really well in 2025. But the crucial takeaway? The era of easy, outsized growth is officially on pause. Ongoing global crises and energy disruptions are making sure of that. Now look at this, because this is where it gets really interesting. Notice that targeted $3.2 billion surplus sitting right next to a forecasted 0.3% quarter-on-quarter contraction for Q1. That contraction, that's the immediate squeeze of global energy crises and rising shipping costs. Yet even with that pressure, they are deliberately hoarding a massive fiscal surplus. Why? Because they absolutely need fiscal dry powder. They need the capital to make really bold bets on emerging sectors where market failure is a huge risk, but doing nothing is an even bigger one. It's kind of like a tech startup dramatically tightening its belt just so it can fund a massive, necessary pivot in its core business model. Moving right along to pillar 2, the AI-native blueprint, building the ultimate productivity engine. Singapore's AI strategy is honestly fascinating, primarily because of what they are not doing. They are totally refusing to try and build these massive, energy-hungry foundational models from scratch just to rival the Silicon Valley giants. No way. Instead, they want to position themselves as a high-trust wrapper layer. Basically, they want to be the premier, highly regulated jurisdiction for testing and deploying real-world AI solutions safely. It's a much more lucrative, application-centric approach. And a huge, huge focus of this deployment is something called agentic AI. We're talking about systems that don't just, generate a block of text. They actually act, decide, and adapt entirely autonomously. This is an absolute game changer for a labor-constrained country because it means you can scale services globally without needing a proportional growth in headcount. Actually, back in January 2026, Singapore launched the world's very first governance framework for these autonomous systems. By laying down these clear, standards-led guardrails, they're basically a magnet for developers of high-stakes AI who desperately need a safe, regulated testing ground. Let's just look at the sheer scale of this rollout across the economy, because the state is throwing some serious weight around. We're talking a $150 million grant to offset massive AI compute bottlenecks for businesses, $150,000 co-investments to pair enterprises directly with top-tier AI researchers, and sweeping national platforms like Helix for health data. It's a very calculated, mathematical attempt to decouple their GDP growth from an aging, shrinking labor force. AI isn't just a fun new tool here. It is literally the strategic spine of the entire economy. Which brings us to pillar 3, funding frontier technologies, deploying capital for bold bets. Now, to fuel a productivity engine like that, you need serious capital. And this visualizes the massive financial commitments they're making to aggressively recycle capital. Look at the $1.5 billion Future Sectors Development Fund for emerging industries, or the $1.5 billion Anchor Fund, which is specifically designed to help high-potential local tech startups successfully IPO on the local exchange. The state is actively allowing less competitive firms to exit the market and then funneling those resources straight into these higher-value, high-tech ventures. All of this capital is aggressively chasing what economists are calling the trust premium. The old days of competing on, basic connectivity or lower labor costs, those are gone. Now it's all about funding high-value, trust-based services. We're talking cybersecurity audits, quantum tech research with companies like Quantinium, and building the fully AI automated Tujas megaport. The whole goal here is frontier capture. They are taking highly calculated risks to ensure Singapore becomes an indispensable node that literally no global supply chain can afford to remove, even as the world continues to fragment. All right, let's look at Pillar 4, evolving the workforce, proactive transitions, and career bridges. Look, you can't have an AI-native nation without an AI-ready workforce, right? And because economic growth doesn't just automatically guarantee good jobs for everyone anymore, the government is stepping in proactively. They're mandating earlier retrenchment notifications to get ahead of job losses. They're broadening financial support for job seekers by raising the income thresholds. And they're even giving citizens 6 months of free access to premium AI tools to blend practical training right into their work. The ultimate goal here is moving workers seamlessly through these structured career bridges, guiding them out of vulnerable, declining roles and straight into resilient, AI-augmented careers. I think this quote from the National Trades Union Congress really hits the nail on the head. They insist that growth must translate into better jobs, stronger progression pathways, and greater career security. It's a very explicit public acknowledgement that while, yes, the creative destruction of old industries is entirely necessary to stay globally competitive, the state and the unions have to work together to ensure that this disruption actually upgrades the everyday citizen in the long run. Finally, Pillar 5, engineering sustainable resilience, tying digital ambitions to physical reality. Here is the absolute reality check at the whole strategy. You can have all the AI ambition in the world, but it literally requires electricity and physical space to run. Because land and power are finite, the state is treating physical resilience exactly like a core economic capability. They're accepting a very pragmatic balance here, knowing that the low-carbon transition has to be realistic, because energy security is just paramount right now. So they're actively stockpiling critical supplies, building energy buffers against global shocks, and they've introduced the Digital Infrastructure Act to enforce really strict baseline energy efficiency standards for data centers. A small island nation simply cannot afford to scale data center capacity endlessly. The newly announced One North AI Park is honestly the perfect example of this delicate balance. It's not some sprawling, endless farm of power-hungry servers. Instead, it's designed as a really dense, collaborative hub for AI developers that strictly matches the sustainable, resource-efficient footprint of existing smart districts. It physically proves that, yes, you can host a dense, cutting-edge AI ecosystem that is both economically vital and environmentally sustainable. So pulling all of these pillars together, the overarching takeaway from this explainer is the concept of sovereign as a platform. Singapore isn't just adopting some new AI tools, it is architecting the state itself to be the ultimate operating system for the companies of tomorrow. It's providing the high-trust governance, the energy-efficient infrastructure, and the massive capital needed for real enterprise transformation. It is literally positioning itself to be the world's premier testing ground. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with this one thought to consider. We are clearly entering an era of persistent volatility. When the global economy fractures and when supply chains break down, will the absolute highest premium simply be paid for trust and unbreakable resilience? Singapore is betting its entire economic future that the answer is yes. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the architecture of the world around you.